You may have noticed that it's Girl Scout cookie season. Usually this is equivalent to an extended national holiday in our home. Thank goodness that for whatever reason, we don't seem to have too many Girl Scouts in our lives this year. I've been reading the trials of some of my friends, though, as they make Facebook after Facebook posts pledging to walk past the Girl Scouts outside the grocery store and abysmally failing for the fourth time in 3 days, when a box of Thin Mints suddenly jumps out and assaults them. I found out this week that Girl Scouts have been selling cookies since 1922, when local troops made cookies from a special recipe, packaged them in wax paper bags with Girl Scout seals, and sold them door to door for 35 cents a dozen. And whoever thought of Girl Scouts selling cookies? Well, actually, her name was Florence Neal from Chicago. She was a genius because as people wait all year long for that special season when all their friends sheepishly walk around the office selling on behalf of their own personal Girl Scouts, and as you and many of my beleaguered Facebook friends know, the cookies sell themselves. They really do. And so I was thinking this week that it's one thing to sell Girl Scout cookies. Those little ones put on the cute little uniforms, set up their tables outside the grocery store, and well, those boxes fly off the shelves. Let's see. Delicious, addictive cookies purchased for a good cause to build girls of courage, confidence, and character who make the world a better place. Not to complain or anything, but I can't help but notice that it's another thing altogether to try to sell a message like the one Jesus was selling, particularly if your marketing slogan is, "Take up your cross and follow me." While even we can see that one might be a little easier than the other, we really have no idea how radical, how offensive even those words of Jesus from Mark's gospel really were to those who heard them. For us, you see, the cross has become a sacred symbol of faith. We display crosses in our churches, we wear them as jewelry, but to read this text accurately, we need to remember that those who were following Jesus would have found even the mere mention of a cross horrifying. Some scholars say that it was a genius move on the part of the Roman government to institute crucifixion as a means of execution in the Roman government's attempts to take over as much of the ancient world as it could. See, in the world in which Jesus lived, the Roman government ruled with an iron fist that kept all of their conquered societies in line using crucifixion. It was a uniquely Roman way to die. You'll recall that Roman citizens were exempt from crucifixion, but the method was liberally used on criminals and especially those who might serve as examples to others considering a disturbance of the peace. During a crucifixion, the punished was nailed or tied to two large beams and left exposed to the elements until he died. The primary goal of crucifixion was to provide a particularly gruesome, painful public death, ushering the victim out of this life in an especially shameful and degrading way. You can imagine the effects of this method of execution on the society in which it happened. Violence, fear, horror. These were the side effects of public crucifixions, and they worked to keep people in line. After all, crucifixions were public spectacles. Sometimes it took days for the crucified to die, and very often bodies were left nailed or tied to crossbeams until they rotted. I could go on, but I think you get the picture. Whatever religious or sacred significance you and I have come to assign to the symbol of the cross was certainly not present in the minds of those who followed Jesus on that day that Mark recounts here. So you can imagine their confusion as they heard his words, "Take up your cross." Was he crazy? Truthfully, while we've managed to sanitize the symbol of the cross sufficiently that we can close our eyes and sing any number of beloved hymns assigning it devotional significance, and even we have taken these and other words of Jesus and created theological constructs that have resulted in some pretty dangerous ideas. Just think, from this passage, Christians have come to believe humans are depraved and therefore deserve whatever suffering comes our way. Or we have to suffer. It's what we do in exchange for God's love. Or if we grit our teeth long and hard enough and manage to survive our suffering, then we get eternal life. Or there's some hidden virtue in suffering, and in fact, we should look for suffering just so we can become better people. It's right here in our Markan text, some would tell you. Here Jesus is explaining to his disciples how he was going to have to go through some pretty horrible experiences. Jesus was trying to disabuse his disciples of any misconceptions about who he was and what he had come to do. See, a lot of folks were really taken with Jesus' miracles. Some were looking for a political leader, and all through the Gospel of Mark, the disciples and others were forever misunderstanding Jesus. So, here he says it straight. The Son of Man will undergo great suffering, will be rejected, will be killed. Then Peter, ever helpful, started protesting, as many of us would do if we were in Peter's shoes. Jesus stopped Peter's protest pretty forcefully, if you ask me, and then launched into his famous speech, the one that has birthed so many of these unfortunate theories about suffering. If you want to be my followers, deny yourselves, take up your cross, and follow me. But I think we've got it significantly wrong when it comes to suffering. All those theological constructs I mentioned, they focus on us. When Jesus was trying so very hard to get us to focus, for a change, on God. Theologians will tell you that all this theorizing about suffering is not unique to the Christian perspective. In fact, most would say that it's the most pressing question of every world religion. Why do we suffer? All of the major world religions have taken a deep breath and tackled an issue we'd rather just avoid altogether, even though every single one of us knows deep down in the core of who we are that suffering is our shared experience. We struggle, we fail, we feel longing and want, we hurt. And nobody has a really great explanation, most of all, because the topic of suffering is not one that you and I are flocking to explore in great detail. Jesus' disciples here in Mark's gospel heard Jesus talking about suffering, and they were running in the other direction, just like we do. They had pinned every hope they carried on him. They desperately wanted a way out of the pain of their human experiences, and there he was, Jesus. He had all the makings of a great politician, someone who would deliver them once and for all from Roman domination, from the pain of their poverty, from their eternal quest to make their lives mean something. They had followed him in hopes that he would and could be their escape, that he was there to turn a new page, that he would indeed usher in that kingdom he was always talking about, complete with some pretty sweet political appointments just for them. Peter said it out loud, but I'll bet that they were all thinking the same thing. See, they didn't have any interest in talking about their pain. They didn't want to be in pain. That was the whole point of following a charismatic leader. And they certainly had no interest in hearing this one, on whom they were pinning their most lofty hopes, talk about something as horrifying as a cross. No. They wanted the problem of human suffering, of doubt, of pain, of all of their uncertainty gone. And while they were waiting for him to take care of that little problem, the last thing they wanted to do was to talk about it. You may be familiar with the Danish poet and author Hans Christian Andersen, who wrote a quaint little fairy tale we know as The Emperor's New Clothes. You'll remember that the story goes like this. An emperor of a prosperous city hires two dishonest salesmen who tell him that they will sew him a fine new set of clothes from a cloth more beautiful than anyone has ever seen before. The thing is that the cloth is so beautiful, it's invisible to anyone who's stupid or unfit for his position. The emperor can't see the cloth, but he doesn't want to appear stupid, so he acts like he can see it. And when the salesmen tell the king that the suit is finished, they pretend to dress him and take him out on a procession through the capital, showing off his new clothes. Of course, everyone has heard the tale of the magic cloth, and nobody wants to look stupid, so folks all clap politely as the king walks by naked. The whole charade is ruined, though, when during the course of the procession, a young child watching on the sidelines yells, "Hey, the king isn't wearing any clothes." Jesus is doing the most audacious thing in this passage. He is naming the pain that all of us carry. He is acknowledging that every human life will experience suffering. And he is suggesting that perhaps the end-all and be-all of human life is not to alleviate the suffering, but rather to find our identity in following Jesus. Jesus wanted his disciples to know, if you want to be my follower, you will suffer. Standing up for what you believe in, facing the powers that work to stifle the gospel message, insisting on a radical message of love, acknowledging the creative power of God at work in the world, setting off in this direction may very well cost you your very life. Jesus was already strongly suspecting that it would cost him his. See what I mean about a hard sell? It's the grand paradox. We find the meaning of our lives, the ease to our pain, the sense that we are home and all is right with the world, not when we desperately try any quick fix to feel better. No. Jesus told his disciples that day, and he tells us something so hard. We gain the very meaning of our lives when we give our lives away. When we look at our lives and we see the suffering we experience, and when we decide, regardless, to follow Jesus. You know, it's no wonder that the foot of the cross was very sparsely populated the day that Jesus died. All the disciples who struggled so hard to understand what he was saying all along just couldn't imagine how this one whom they had held with so much promise and hope, thinking that he could fix their political problems once and for all, was hanging there, nailed on a cross, crucified. They didn't come to the hill where Jesus' cross was placed because they still didn't quite get it. They were paralyzed by their fear. They were huddled in remote hiding places, or even publicly denying that they had even known him. There was nothing about the specter of the cross that proclaimed, "Take it easy," or "No more pain." And these are certainly not the messages that Jesus offers you and me. Instead, here's the invitation. Look your greatest fear and your deepest pain straight in the eyes. That's the pick up your cross part. This pain and struggle are part of human living. And then, refuse to let your pain structure your life, define your existence, motivate your living. Instead, come on and follow, because it's by acknowledging the suffering and fear, but getting up to follow anyway, that you and I will finally discover who we really, really are. Precious, precious children of God. Amen.